This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Anyone, any questions, guys, before we get started? So yesterday we were looking into service endpoints as one of the topics that was not covered. So I just want to make sure that we cover before we again come back or we again do a deep dive into Azure DevOps. So any questions? Anyone? Any questions?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. What?
So, in the documentation of service endpoint,
Mhm.
could you please explain about the NAT IPs?
Okay, network address translation IPs. Again, in which context did you read about the NAT IPs? Like, where did you read the same thing about? Where did you exactly read the same thing there? You mean this one? Pavani, you mean this one? I'm not sure if you're able to. Oh, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm unable to hear you. Okay, I'll circle back on that question. Is anyone any other questions, guys? Anyone any more questions here? Okay, let me take that question, Pavani. At the end of the session, I'll just park it out. I'm not able to really hear you out, so I'll just come back to you again. All right, let's coming back to Azure DevOps. This is where we are, guys. So we have an Azure repos already set up. This repos is called as the iOS application. So I have a project, and inside this particular project, I have my repository setup called iOS application. And inside this, I have a folder, I have my code, I have branches, and I have multiple branches out here. And the last we spoke about was the branching and the merging strategy. Like, how do you, let's say, go and take the branches, merge it out, and so on and so forth. And what is the strategy that a company follows to perform this software development lifecycle? And what I did, let me close this. What I did was I had a branch called as a develop branch for our primary developmental activities. So if you remember the branching and merging strategies diagram that we had a branch out here, and all my developers are using feature branches to go ahead and make their merge or go ahead and let's say merge their changes into this particular branch. And this branch that they have, which is nothing but the feature branch from the local machine, this is getting deleted after the merge is done. This branch is actually getting deleted, and once this is deleted, all the changes are there in, let's say, our develop branch out here. So all the changes, as in all the code, is there in the develop branch right now. So my question for everyone, guys, what should we do next? We have all the code right now. So once we have all the code, what were we thinking to do next? Can anyone please give me some inputs here?
How to build the code.
Code build.
Code build, exactly, which means that the code that the developer is actually putting inside the repository, that particular code is in a very high level language right now. Meaning this code the developer is giving me, I'm asking the developers not to build the code on their local machine for multiple reasons out here. I shouldn't have the code built out here is what I'm telling the developers. And they're not doing the same thing. So they're not building the code, they're just writing the code and they're just placing the code inside the repository right now. And it is me as a DevOps engineer who needs to now go ahead and create something called as a build pipeline. Called as a build pipeline. So my responsibility till here again as a DevOps engineer, we go ahead create the project. We go ahead to create the let's say create the repositories in the project, create the branches in the project, and we also go ahead and make sure to secure the branches using something called as branch policies. And once we secure the branches, we are also responsible to go ahead and create and maintain something called as a build pipeline out here as such. So what the intention here is to make sure to connect this branch to the build pipeline, and the expectation from the build pipeline is that there are some steps inside this particular build pipeline which will go ahead and convert the code that is there in a very high level language to a low level language called binaries or artifacts. Binaries or artifacts out here as such. This is what I have to do, or this is what is the expectation from me as a DevOps engineer right now. And this entire process is called as a process of build. So process of build is nothing but just the code from a high level language, converting it into, let's say, the binaries or the artifact. This is called as a build. Earlier we used to do build and deployment using our Visual Studio, but now I am proposing that we replace that particular Visual Studio with something like a pipeline on Azure DevOps. This is what now that I'm telling is that okay, fine, let's go ahead and replace that particular build pipeline out here. So then let's go ahead and replace the Visual Studio out here using a build pipeline. So how do I do that? Let's see. So let me firstly go ahead into Azure DevOps. I have the branches, I have all these things. Let me go into something called pipelines. I'll say pipelines out here. Now this is the screen that you get telling that you know what you do not really have a pipeline. Go ahead, create your first pipeline out here. I'll say yes, I want to create a pipeline. Let me go ahead, create a pipeline out here. It's telling me okay, fine. In order for you to, let's say, go ahead and create a pipeline, first tell me how do you want to create a pipeline? Like, do you want to use something called YAML, or do you want to use something called as a classic editor? So let's start here. We'll tell without YAML. Let's go ahead and do a classic editor, one of the simplest, one of the easiest way to do it. We'll come down to YAML. We'll understand what YAML really is. So I'll say use classic editor. Now it's telling me the very first thing it's telling, okay, fine, you know what? Can you tell me where your code is? Can you tell me in which source control you have placed your code? Is it the Azure repository? Is it the GitHub? Is it somewhere else? Is it something like Bitbucket? Is it something like other Git? Where your code is? Where exactly do you think your code really is out here? In my case, all my code is sitting in, let's say, the particular Azure repositories out here. And in this particular Azure repository, my code is sitting in a project called Sample Learning, in a repository called iOS application, and in a branch called develop branch of this particular repository. This is where my code is actually sitting in. So I'll say, okay, fine, you know what? Let me go ahead, scroll down. I'll change this branch to something like develop. So I'll put this as develop. I'll say continue. And now it's telling me, uh, can you tell me what kind of a code are you really building out? Are you trying to build out a Java application, or are you trying to do a Python? Are you trying to do a .NET? What exactly that you're doing? Even if you're doing .NET, what kind of a .NET are you doing? So if you look at the repository, right? Let's just stay. If you look at the repository out here, I'll just open this in a new tab. If I just go into the repository services, or if I go into this particular CS project file, it's quite evident the code that I'm writing is in a language called .NET 3.1. So it's a .NET Core application 3.1 again, and you do not have to really know this. You don't really have to, as a DevOps engineer, understand what is the framework of the code that is built in. You can anytime ask the developer, or you can anytime work with the development team telling that okay, fine, can you please help me, or can you please help us out in telling which version, in the version in which you have developed the code. Can you please tell me? The developer would be able to comment on this, telling that okay, fine, we have done this code in, let's say, .NET something, or .NET 7 or .NET 6 or whatever it is. I'll say okay, great. I'll say great, let me do that. And since the developer is telling it is .NET, let's type in .NET here. I'm doing a .NET, And then it's saying, okay, fine, featured, it's saying .NET Desktop. Just scroll down. There is something called ASP.NET Core. Normally, there are two flavors of .NET out here. One is ASP.NET Full Framework. The other is ASP.NET Core. Full frameworks are not so used these days. ASP.NET Core is widely used. So I'll go with this particular template called ASP.NET Core. I'll say apply. And this is what it's doing right now. Now it's telling, okay, fine. I have created a pipeline for you and I've created some steps in the pipeline for you. And these steps together, these steps that are together working with each other, they would go ahead and help you do a code build. They would together go ahead and do or help you do a code build out here. But yes, all these tasks, they need some attention, meaning they need you to, let's say, give some inputs out here. What are the inputs is this. Firstly, the name of the pipeline. This is the very first thing that I would say is the name of the pipeline is something that you have to declare. Again, if you see here, you can change it from here or you can change it here. That's not a problem. The very first thing is that we should give a meaningful name to this particular pipeline. The second thing is we should define what is the agent pool on which this pipeline should run. Let me clarify that on what do you mean by agent pool, what exactly that is, and etc. Let's do that. Let's come here and firstly let's remove this out. I'll say this is .NET application build, and now it's asking you what is the agent pool. Now, very simple. Just understand this. If I have to build the same code on my local machine, same code, guys, let's say the same code on my local machine, I need a couple of things. What are those couple of things? Is that firstly, I need a platform in which, or I need a platform on which I can store my code. In this case, let's say the platform is my laptop. So I have a laptop, and this laptop has some space, hard drive, and so on and so forth. That's the reason I'm able to store this code inside my laptop. So the code is there on my laptop, and I also need something called as an operating system that I need to install on my laptop so that I can interact with my laptop, I can interact with my machine, I can pass multiple commands to this machine, and so on and so forth. On top of this, in order to do a code build, I have installed a software called Visual Studio. I have a software called Visual Studio, which is helping me go ahead and do a code build. So if I open my Visual Studio, hit the option called build, it's using the operating system, meaning it's talking to the operating system and it's going ahead and doing some operations on my code, which will help me convert this entire code from a high level language to a language called or to a low level language out here. So these are the steps that are involved, or these are the couple of things that I need, which means that I would need all these things in order to go ahead and build the code. Firstly, the code itself. Secondly, a platform. Third, an operating system. Fourth, a Visual Studio. Or fourth, some kind of software called Visual Studio or like Visual Studio, which can help me go ahead and do a code build. This is what I need. Now, I am avoiding all these things. I'm avoiding all these things out here. And I'm telling that, okay, fine, you know what? I don't want to do this because I want to do everything on the cloud. Even in the cloud, I need something similar. I need some kind of a platform. And in place of my laptop, I have a virtual machine. In place of my laptop, I am replacing my laptop with my virtual machine. I will have the same OS. I will have the same Visual Studio, and the same code is something that I need. Code is already there. Code is already there on something called as the Azure repository out here. The same code is I need to take the same code and then I need to, let's say, build the same code out here. Now the question is, who is going to give me this, let's say, virtual machine? Because laptop I went ahead and purchased it out. Now, in order to make sure that I build this code out, I need some kind of an infrastructure on which I can build. Now I'm asking Microsoft that, okay, Microsoft, you know what? Who can give me this virtual machine? Microsoft says, you know what? It's up to you. If you want to create a virtual machine on the Azure portal and if you want to use it as a build machine, we call it as a build machines because it's just used for one single purpose to just go ahead and build your code. So Microsoft is telling me that, okay, fine, you know what? If you want to go ahead and let's say go to the Azure portal, create a virtual machine, let's say something like Windows Server 2016, 2019, 2022, whatever it is. And if you want to go ahead and let's say use that particular machine to build the code, you're welcome. You can go ahead and do that. Or if you want me to give, meaning me as in the cloud provider to give some kind of a platform to go ahead and build your code, even that is possible. So Microsoft is telling me that there are two options. Two models here. The first model is you create your own machine. On the Azure portal, pay for it, do whatever you want, and you can use this as a build machine. If you are going for this particular model, we call this as a self-hosted agent, or we can also call this as a private agent out here. So self-hosted or a private agent is something that you can call. But on the other hand, if you want to go for a software as a service model, meaning if you don't want to take the headache of let's say creating and maintaining your own machine, you can ask Microsoft that please can you please provide me a machine? Meaning cloud provider provides you a machine or cloud provider gives you the machine. If you are using this model where the cloud provider is giving you the machine, this is called as a hosted agent model. Two types, hosted and self-hosted. Hosted is where the cloud provider gives you. Self-hosted is self, meaning by ourselves we have to go ahead and let's say create the machine and let's say maintain the machine and so on and so forth. These are the two agent models that are available. And this is quite important. Reason being your agent is a very important, let's say, piece of your pipeline, which will help you build the code, which will help you give the compute memory, the compute memory and all these things in order to go ahead and convert this entire code. Without the agent, you cannot go ahead and build the code. And that's the reason, guys. If you remember the very first class of Azure DevOps, I asked everyone to go ahead and let's say raise something called as a parallelism request. This is to make sure that Azure gives you a free agent. And without this agent, you won't be able to really build your code or you won't be able to really do anything out here as such. So let me do one thing. Let me come back to the Azure portal. And this is where it's telling me is that what is your agent pool? Is it Azure pipelines? Which means, is it a hosted agent or is it something called as a private agent? So if you see this here, this is what it's telling you. A hosted model wherein the cloud provider is going to give you the agent, or a private model wherein you have to go ahead and create your own agent out here and you have to let's say do a couple of steps to maintain this and so on and so forth. I'll say to begin with, I will go ahead and choose something called as an Azure Pipelines. And now it's telling me, okay, fine, I'm ready to give you the agent. But can you tell me what is the agent specification? Meaning, do you need a Mac operating system? Meaning a VM with a Mac operating system? Do you need like Mac 10, Mac 11, Mac 12 or something latest? Do you need an Ubuntu, which is Linux machine? Or do you need something in Windows? I'll say it is Windows latest. This is what I need to select. All I'm telling is that, okay, fine, you know what? Go ahead, give me something called as a Windows latest. And it is the duty of Microsoft to go ahead and let's say create a machine in the background, not in your portal. It's creating a machine somewhere on the cloud, installing a lot of softwares on this machine, like .NET Core, like WinZip, a lot of applications like Google Chrome and so on and so forth. It keeps the machine ready and provisions this particular machine out to you so that you can go ahead and do a code build. Finally, it's asking me, okay, fine, do you what are the projects that you want me to build? Again, if you go back into your repository, right, this is your application, this is the solution file of your application, this is the project file of your application. Normally, a .NET application has a project file with an extension called .cs project. This is what you normally go ahead and let's say target in order to build the application. Even when you open your applications in Visual Studio, right? This is the file that you do a right click on and say build. So it's asking me, what is the path for your CS project file? I can just click here. I can just copy this entire path and go back, remove this out and paste this here. I can say, you know what, this is the path. Now it's asking me, do you also have some test cases? Meaning, do you have a QA team? Did they write some test cases or something? As of now, no. So what I'll do is here in the third step, .NET test, I'll right click here and I'll say remove the task. All I'm doing is right now I'm telling, okay, fine, remove this particular task. I am okay to go with the bare basic with the minimal tasks out here called .NET Restore, .NET Build, .NET Publish. All you're doing is that you're taking a project right now. So let's say that I have a project in my local machine. So let's check that out. So I have this project called iOS application. Same thing. I just let's say pushed all this project, right? So all I'm doing is that I'm coming here. This is a CS project file. And even if I open a CMD here, if I open a command prompt here, all I am doing on the cloud is running some commands called .NET Restore and then something called as .NET Build to build my application. So all I'm doing is like in my local machine in order to let's say go ahead and let's say convert this particular project. I am running a couple of commands called .NET Restore, .NET Build and .NET Publish. Finally something called .NET Publish. To make my application a published version out here, I'm going ahead and running this called .NET Publish. And finally, if you see, I have the application completely converted into DL and stored it inside a directory called publish directory out here. The same three commands is what I am going ahead and running on the cloud in order to convert my code. And finally, you have one more, let's say, step here called publish artifacts. We'll talk about that on what publish artifacts is. But what we are going to do right now is that we are going to spin up our pipeline. We are going to run the pipeline for the very first time. So I'll say save and queue and I'll say it's run. I'll just give a comment here and I'll just save and run. So all I did is that I gave the name to the pipeline. I selected my agent pool. I just removed one particular task here and I said save and run out here. And now it went ahead and it queued a pipeline. This is how it looks like. So if I click on this one, it's telling .NET application build. This is the name of the pipeline. If you click on this particular pipeline, it's telling, okay, fine. This is the code push that happened, and on top of which I'm doing a build. So if I click on that again, I have the agent job, and now it's telling, okay, fine. You know what? I will go ahead and execute the tasks in the same order that you have told: restore, build, and publish. This is what my pipeline is doing till here. Any questions clear, guys? Anyone? Any questions still here, or any confusion still here? Anyone? Any questions that I can answer?
Sir, good morning, sir. Madhu here.
Good, please.
Sir, for example, if you are in SaaS, I mean software as service model,
Mm-hmm.
so we'll ask Microsoft to create your build machine, right? That means virtual machines,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So so automatically that build, sorry, Microsoft will create a build machine for us based on our local machine configuration only, right, sir?
No, it is not your local machine configuration. Microsoft will never know what is the local machine configuration that you're working on.
Mhm.
Microsoft, for example, let's see this. The very first thing, if you looked at your pipeline, the very first thing that happens is called initialize job.
Okay, sir.
What this step does is very simple thing. You have requested for a Microsoft hosted agent. So this pipeline is going in the background. It's requesting Microsoft that, you know what, can you give me a hosted agent? Can you please go ahead, give me a hosted agent, or can you please give me a virtual machine? Microsoft says, okay, fine. The virtual machine that you requested for is something like Windows latest, because this is what I requested for, right? When I created, this is what I requested. It's saying, okay, fine, you know what, I'll get an agent, or I'll get a virtual machine with the name called Windows, something like this. And it's saying, okay, fine, you know what, I will give you the latest operating system called Windows Server 2022. And this is the image. It's a generic image. Even if you do it, I do it, you get the same thing, I'll get the same thing. And this is what it's telling me. These are all the included softwares. Now, this is a Windows 2022 it's a Windows 22 server operating system. My local machine has a configuration of Windows 11, nowhere close to each other, or there are nowhere comparable to each other. So this is a generic image that Microsoft maintains at its end. And if you want to look at what are the softwares that are included with this particular image, you can click here. It will take you to this particular GitHub page where it's going to tell you what are all the softwares that it includes as a part of this particular build machine. So this configuration is independent of what your local machine is. It has nothing to do with your local machine at all, which means if you are a developer, you run it from your end, you are going to run it in the same configuration that I'm going to run it. If you are a tester, you run it, or you run it at your end with a different machine. You can have an Ubuntu machine or a Windows machine or a Mac machine, whatever it is. You come here, you trigger it off, you get the same configuration, which means that I'm building and testing on the same environment. That's what the idea here is. Does it answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Any more questions here, guys? Anyone? Any more questions here? Right. So if you see this, this is what is happening on an end-to-end basis. Let's draw this out. The very first thing, the very first step one. Okay, just check this out. Let's say step one is called initialize job, wherein Microsoft is going ahead in the background, creating a virtual machine with some predefined softwares installed on top of it. Since you asked for Windows 2022, which is or Windows latest, it went ahead and said, okay, fine, you know what? I have a generic image called Windows 2022 in the background. I'll create that image for you, and I'll create this particular machine for you. And this machine is now ready. What do you want to do right now? That's where step two comes in. In the step two, this is now a plain machine with all the required software that are installed. In order to do a build, in order to do a code build, this machine also needs to have your code that is there in the Azure repository. So as of now, all your code is in the Azure repos. So what it does, or what your pipeline does, is that now your pipeline does something called as a checkout job. It means all the code that is there in your repository is downloaded on top of this particular machine. So the machine has the code. Now that's one of the primary requirements for you to, let's say, go ahead and do, let's say, a build process. And Microsoft downloads all these code into something called as the S folder on the machine. So this is a virtual machine. Imagine it has multiple drives, and in one drive it just went ahead and created a folder called S. We call this as the source folder or S folder. Call this as a source folder or the S folder out here. So it's going ahead and it's downloading all the code in the step 2. So for the first step, if you check this out, it's initializing the job. So it's getting the machine firstly. Secondly, it's doing a checkout. It's telling I'll check out the code from this particular iOS application at the develop branch, meaning from the develop branch of that particular repository to the S folder of the machine. So it's downloading that particular code there. Then it's then it's running all these commands. Step 3 here. Sorry. Step 3 here is to run all the commands. All .NET Restore, build and publish. So it has all the code in that particular S folder. Now it's running the command right now in order to create a published version of my application. Meaning even if I go here, right, and I ran all these commands, now it's telling, you know what, there is a published version of your application in this particular folder. So if you go here in this particular folder of my machine, I have all the code that is ready to be taken and deployed on top of a server. It will work. This is all my DLLs, or this is all my artifacts out here. That is what even this step here on the cloud has done. It just went ahead. It said restore, it said build, and then it went ahead and did a publish. And in the publish, it's going ahead and storing all the code in this particular folder of that particular agent. And this folder is called as the A folder. All the published code is stored in the A folder of your virtual machine. So S folder is called as the source folder where the initial code is downloaded. A folder, or we also call this as the artifact staging directory. Very simple. The name just indicates that, you know what, I'm just holding the artifacts for some time. Let me know what you want to do with that. Step 4 is called publish artifacts. Why is it called publish artifacts? For a very obvious reason. You know what? All your code right now is on the machine. You know, all your code, all your published version of the code is in the A folder of the machine. After the build pipeline is done, right, what Microsoft does is Microsoft simply goes and destroys this machine because some other customer of Azure needs this machine. So it will clean all the code in this machine and give it to, or recycle the same code, or recycle the same machine to a different customer, or to a different, let's say, client of Microsoft out here who's requesting for a self-hosted agent. So what I need to do is that before this machine gets cleaned up and before this machine gets destroyed, before I lose this machine, I need to make sure to download this artifact somewhere. And that's where Azure tells you that, okay, fine, you know what, don't worry. The pipelines can also hold the artifacts. The pipelines can also hold the artifacts, but please tell me if I want to, or please tell me if you want me to hold it out. And that's the reason you have something called as publish build artifacts out here. It simply goes ahead into that particular A folder of the machine. It says, okay, fine, in the A folder, I have all the, let's say, executable version of the code. I'll just take everything and I'll upload it into something called as a drop location on the pipeline. This is called as a drop folder. So if you just go back, right, if you just click back, under related, you have something called one published artifact. It says one consumed, meaning it's telling, okay, fine, I'm going ahead and consuming the code and I'm publishing and I'm publishing the code in the form of a .zip file. So if you download this .zip file, right, and if I just open this out called iOS application.zip, and I'll extract this out. So let me go there and extract this out here. And once if I extract and look at this, let's see how it really looks like. So I'm just downloading this. So if you see, right, same folder structure, the same thing that I already had in my local machine. So even if I look at my local machine, right, let's see, where is that folder? Publish folder. This is something that I went ahead and created. I did a local command, I did a publish and so on and so forth. I got all these things. Same way, I just went ahead and downloaded it. I get the same thing out here as such. So whatever I was doing in my local machine, I'm just going ahead doing it on the cloud, and I'm now calling this as a build pipeline out here as such. So on the cloud, I just went ahead, created something called as a pipeline service, and executed this particular pipeline, which had number of steps like restore, build, publish, and then publish artifacts. All these three steps are responsible to, let's say, do a build and publish of my code. And the fourth step is just to help me take the published version of the code and download it on the pipeline so that I can go ahead and, let's say, use that artifact in the further sessions. Like I can do a release with this particular code and so on and so forth. So this is what a build pipeline really does out here as such. So yes, any questions clear? Anyone, any questions clear?
Good morning, Abhishek.
Guys, at least go ahead, please.
I just wanted to know why we are using CMD talk, in the parallel with these pipelines.
No, I'm just showing you how it's done on the local. I'm not using it parallelly. I'm just showing you what exactly happens on my local machine if I do that.
Okay, so all these things are automatically, it will be done by the pipelines, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
No problem. Yes, anyone, any more questions, guys? No, anyone, any questions till here? Now, this was a build pipeline. Now, my intention is that whenever a developer makes some change to the repository, right? This is the branch of the repository. Whenever a developer comes here, makes some change. Okay, just a second, let's see. Now, whenever a developer comes here, makes some change into this particular repository, I want my pipeline to get automatically triggered. This is what I want. Okay, just a second. I'm not sure why my okay. Fine. So whenever a developer makes some change to this particular repository, I want this pipeline service to automatically trigger and build me an or let's say give me the artifact out here. If I have such a kind of an intention, this pipeline will be called as a continuous integration pipeline. We no longer call it as a build, but rather we call this as a continuous integration pipeline out here as such. Which means that if I go here, how do I make this as a continuous integration pipeline? Very simple. If I just go into my pipelines, if I click on the pipeline, I'll say edit. There is something called as triggers. If I click on this, I can say please go ahead and enable something called as continuous integration out here. That's it. I can say enable and please enable it for the develop branch of my repository. I'll say save, and in the comment I can say enabled continuous integration trigger, and I can save this out. And once this is done, what will happen is this. I am a developer, I'm making some change, so I'll create a feature branch. I'll say feature / Kiran, some change. I'll say create this out, and if I just go ahead make some change on my code, so if I'll just go ahead go into the pages of my code, the index page of my code. I'll make a change here. I'll just edit all these things out, and I'll say this is CI demo on Azure DevOps. Something I'm writing here. I'll say commit. I'll create a pull request into the develop branch of my repository, and I'll say go ahead and create this out. It at least needs one to approve this out. So I'll delete my branch after this is approved. I'll say approve, and the merge gets completed. And once the merge gets completed, it automatically goes ahead and triggers off this particular pipeline. So I didn't do anything. I went ahead and triggered off this particular pipeline. How do I know that? Here, if you see, it's telling this is an individual CI, individual continuous integration. The bottom one, it's telling the bottom one here, it's telling it is manually triggered for someone. So it's manually triggered for me, and this is an individual continuous integration. Now, same process is going to happen, but it's going to take the code with the latest commits and also build the same thing out and produce an artifact out here right now. This is an automated procedure right now. And in the further classes, I'll just go ahead and use this artifact, deploy it onto Azure. And if I automate that too, we call it as continuous deployment. So it is a continuous integration plus a continuous deployment is what we're going to really look at out here as such. Yes, anyone, any questions still here on what do you mean by a build pipeline? What do you mean by a continuous integration? And what are the steps inside a build pipeline that we need to really take care of out here as such? Again, guys, if you're not practicing this on a regular basis, it will really be difficult to follow the class. Each and every class is linked to each other. So please make sure that you're doing a regular practice out here, and please make sure that please make sure the questions that you have are answered on a regular basis. If you even have a simple doubt, please reach out so that I can help you all with the same thing out here as such. Is anyone any questions?
Hello.
Go please.
Sir, for example, development branch is on top, on based on development branch, we are creating future branch, right? So we're
Correct.
applying branching policies on top of that development branches. Then once we perform the merge operation, automatically it's going to get deleted.
Yes.
So so once it is merged, I mean, once we perform the pull request, no problem. Already the code will be in the development branch, will be available. So before that, unfortunately, if the future branch got deleted, is there any option to restore it back?
No, there is no option to restore it back. The developer has to again recreate the feature branch,
Develop.
or the developer would have had the feature branch in his local machine. So in that way, he can create a new feature branch out here as such. But if it gets deleted, no, you cannot, let's say, again recover it back.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
Any more questions, guys? Okay, so Pavni, you had a question. I did not really follow that. So please send me across an email on what exactly where you, let's say, let's say, stumbled at. And please make sure to send me across the documentation link on where you did read it so that I can go ahead and, let's say, rectify the same thing out here for you. Anyone, any more questions in this current context? Anything else that I can take here? Okay, thank you guys and have a good day ahead. Thank you.